Thanks for joining us on the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the half hour. U.S. President Donald Trump threatens to shoot boats laying mines as tension escalates in the Strait of Hormuz. UK Cabinet Office chief admitted there appears to be no record of Prime Minister's decision to sign off the appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador. Plus, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights warns on the issue of disappearances in Mexico. Let's begin the world today. We're beginning in the Middle East. U.S. President Donald Trump says the U.S. now has total control over the Strait of Hormuz, ordering the Navy to shoot and kill any boat laying mines there. Meanwhile, the U.S. forces have boarded a ship carrying Iranian oil in the Indian Ocean, adding that it will pursue global maritime enforcement efforts to disrupt illicit networks and interdict sanctioned vessels providing material support to Iran. The tanker was interdicted in the Indian Ocean, far from the hotly contested Strait of Hormuz, and the latest seizure that is part of a tit-for-tat series of commercial vessel interdictions by U.S. and Iranian forces. The U.S. operation in the Indian Ocean comes days after its forces boarded a tanker in its Indo-Pacific area of command. Well, staying in the Middle East, President Donald Trump has announced that there is no time for ending the war in Iran, emphasizing that Washington is under no time pressure as a ceasefire holds and peace talks remain uncertain. Addressing reporters, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reiterated President Trump was not going to set a deadline for the latest Iran ceasefire.
He has not done that, and I won't. I know there's been some anonymous sourced reporting that there was maybe a 3 to 5 day deadline. That is not true. The president has not set a deadline himself. Ultimately, he will dictate the timetable. And again, he is satisfied with the naval blockade, and he understands that Iran is in a very weak position, and the cards are in President Trump's hands right now. Mary Bruce.
The president is not setting a deadline with this ceasefire right now, but this war has already gone on longer than he said it would initially. How long should Americans be prepared for this war to go on?
Look, I think President Trump ultimately will dictate the timeline, and he will do so when he feels is in the best interest of the United States and the American people. The response is you guys all see a lot of different messaging coming out of Iran, a lot of different rhetoric and language from them. I would caution you to take anything that they say at face value. What we've seen is that what they say publicly is much different than what they concede to the United States and our negotiating team privately. I've said that repeatedly to all of you in the news media, and you should take our word for it.
In a sudden shakeup in the U.S. maritime amid the Middle East conflict, the Pentagon has announced the exit of the country's Navy Secretary John Peelon from President Trump's administration. Spokesperson Sean Purnell made this known through a social media post, saying he was leaving the administration effective immediately. However, he did not provide reasons or say whether it was his decision to go. According to unconfirmed reports in U.S. media, his exit came after tension with the American leadership over issues around shipbuilding. This marks the second major leadership shakeup at the Pentagon since the Iran war began in late February. In the meantime, Navy Undersecretary Hung Kao will serve on an acting basis in the role, which is largely administrative. At least 8 Palestinians have been killed in 2 Israeli strikes in the Gaza Strip. According to medics and first responders, 5 were killed when a drone struck a group near a mosque in the northern town of Beit Lahia. The Israeli military claimed it had targeted what it called a terrorist who had approached troops in the area of the Yellow Line, which marks territory held by Israeli forces, and posed an immediate threat. However, Hamas spokesperson who condemned the attack described it as a horrific massacre, accusing Israel of undermining efforts to implement their ceasefire agreement. Well, Lebanon is accusing Israel of war crimes after Israeli airstrikes killed 1 journalist and injured another in the southern part of the country. Local media says Amal Khalil, who worked for the Lebanese newspaper Al Akhbar, was killed while performing her journalistic duties alongside a freelance photographer, Zainab Faraj, who was also injured. Officials in Lebanon say they were deliberately targeted as they sought shelter in a home after an initial airstrike that hit the vehicle in front of them, killing 2 men. The officials also accuse the Israel Defense Forces of intentionally targeting a marked ambulance as it tried to reach the journalists in the village of Tari. However, the IDF has denied the allegations, saying it was preventing rescue teams from reaching the area and not trying to target the journalists. While the rest of the world is affected by oil and gas shortages, in the Philippines, in the town of Polomolok, known famously as the pineapple capital of the country, an innovative environmental project is addressing a long-standing waste dilemma while promoting sustainability. Surula Biogas Ventures Corporated, a subsidiary of Metro Pacific Investments Corporation, has successfully implemented a waste-to-energy solution that converts tons of pineapple residue from Dole, the Philippines, into clean biogas and high-grade organic fertilizer. Historically, the vast pineapple plantations in South Cotabato have generated hundreds of tons of organic waste daily, posing significant disposal challenges. The Surala facility now embodies a circular economy approach. Waste is converted into energy, while nutrient-rich bioproducts are used to enrich the fields for future harvests. Project manager at SBVC, Brill Dolor, describes the facility as a significant advancement in agricultural technology. Project, which represents a 1 billion peso investment, was brought to fruition through a meticulous development timeline. And beyond energy generation, the initiative provides a critical alternative to traditional fuel sources, helping Dole mitigate the impact of rising fuel costs driven by global market volatility, including events like the US-Iran war. Tensions between Russia and Europe continue to escalate as Germany's foreign ministry in Berlin summons Moscow's ambassador over explicit threats targeting sites in Germany. For more now, let's cross to Thomas Sparrow, our correspondent, with our partners, the DW in Berlin. Thomas, can you give us more details about this decision by the German Foreign Ministry?
Indeed, the German Foreign Ministry announced a decision to summon the Russian ambassador here in Berlin, citing direct threats against German targets. Now, this is certainly not the first time that the Russian ambassador is summoned here in Berlin, but it is a decision that may also increase tensions between Russia and Germany, between Russia and Europe. The German Foreign Ministry added in its statement that it would not feel intimidated by any kind of Russian threat, hence the decision also to summon the Russian ambassador. Summoning an ambassador is seen here in Germany, is seen here in Europe as a particularly strong sign of disagreement towards another government, as a specific request for clarification when it comes to a political decision made by another government. So this gives you an idea of how significant this decision by the German Foreign Ministry is. What's also interesting about this development is that the German Foreign Ministry, in its statement, did not specifically mention any more details about those direct threats against German targets. But German media outlets, distinguished, reputable media outlets here in Germany, have linked that statement by Germany's foreign ministry to an announcement by Russia's defense ministry mentioning European companies that have been supporting Ukraine specifically when it comes to strengthening its drone production. And in that list that was mentioned by Russian authorities, there were several companies from Germany, and other Russian officials, in particular from Russia's Security Council, then linking that list to a possible also decision by Russian authorities to then target those companies. So this is the backdrop, this is the context that may explain that decision that was made by Germany's foreign ministry to summon the Russian ambassador here in Berlin. Definitely a very significant development when it comes to Russia's relationships towards Germany.
And in what ways might these Russian threats affect broader NATO strategies across Europe amid ongoing Ukraine support?
So if we focus not only on Germany, but also on Europe and more broadly on NATO, it's important to remember that NATO members have been among the strongest supporters of Ukraine since the war began in 2022. That support obviously has been in military terms, with military equipment, also with drone production, etc. But it has also been political and it has also been economic. And the war began in 2022, so several years ago. And that support has continued and in some cases also strengthened throughout the years. So when we look at these potential direct threats that are coming from Russia towards European targets, it is very probable that this will increase the resolve among NATO partners to continue supporting Ukraine on the one hand and to also strengthen its own military capabilities to then potentially confront those direct threats. It's also, however, important to mention that since the war has been going on for so long, since there are other conflicts around the world that have taken center stage since, there is a perceived sense of fatigue when it comes to Ukraine aid among many in Europe. So it has also been a challenge for European capitals. It has been a challenge for European governments to help understand, to explain to populations here in Europe why it is necessary to continue supporting Ukraine in this war that began in 2022.
So what security measures are European countries adopting in response to similar hybrid threats from Russia?
So it's interesting that it was not only Germany that summoned the Russian ambassador in Berlin. Other countries have also reacted to the publishing of that list, to these potential direct threats. In particular, the Czech Republic also demanded clarification from Russia. Apparently, the list also contained Czech firms that were supporting Ukraine. So this gives you an idea that this is not only something that is affecting Germany, but also other European countries as well. More broadly, it's important to understand that European capitals and NATO members have been preparing for this scenario over the last few years. They've been strengthening their own military capabilities, traditional military capabilities, but also when it comes to cyber defense, to cyber warfare, to other elements within the whole scenario of supporting Ukraine in its defense against Russia. It's important also to mention that whereas there are national decisions, for example, Germany Foreign Ministry summoning Russia's ambassador, or the Czech authorities also demanding an answer from Russia, most of the political decisions, most of the foreign affairs decisions that have to do with Ukraine also play a role when it comes to Brussels, when it comes to the European Union as a whole. So any of these discussions, any of these decisions will likely have the dual scenario of, on the one hand, having a national element, Germany versus Russia, the Czech Republic versus Russia, or other countries also in their own political decisions, but also always that European component as well. And this is something that will likely continue as we discuss, as Europeans discuss, how the war in Ukraine could actually end, what needs to happen for the war in Ukraine to actually end.
Thanks again, Thomas Sparrow in Berlin. We're off on a break now on The World Today. Still ahead. I do apologize. We have read this story before, but there will be more from the Philippines, though. Children heeding Pope Leo's call to share messages of peace. Stay with us. Welcome back. Still watching The World Today. UK Cabinet Office Chief Kat Little, one of the top civil servants tasked with assisting the Prime Minister, sensationally admitted earlier today there appeared to be no record of Keir Starmer's decision to sign off the appointment of his former US Ambassador Peter Mandelson. Mandelson was sacked after his links to the late pedophile billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, although he denies wrongdoing. Starmer himself has been under intense pressure to quit over the way Mandelson was given security clearance, with Foreign Office Chief Sir Ollie Robbins this week alleging there had been intense pressure on his department from the Prime Minister's own office. The Prime Minister also fired Robbins last week, saying he'd failed to tell him about veteran issues. But Little also refused to back Starmer's version, contradicting him twice in her astonishing exchange with members of Parliament.
I think at the beginning of Sir Oliver Robbins's evidence, he told us that the Cabinet Office had been in touch with him, I believe he said, saying that was the Cabinet Office really sure that vetting was required, presumably because Peter Mandelson was a member of the House of Lords, he was a Privy Councillor, he was a former member of the Cabinet, and also presumably as well because these sorts of political appointments are as rare as hen's teeth. So from what you understand, was there a question like that was being asked? Do you know what the discussion was between the Cabinet Office and the Foreign Office?
I don't have records of verbal conversations. In my role as gathering information in the audit trail and the fact-finding about the decisions that were undertaken, I do have access to a number of emails which have been disclosed recently to me. And what those emails set out is what I see as a very reasonable policy conversation between security officials, whereby the Foreign Office personnel security team get in touch with the UKSB and the Government Security Group in the Cabinet Office and ask the question, could they get some advice? Because the presumption had been that given Peter Mandelson had been a member of the House of Lords, that the long-standing convention that he didn't require developed vetting was assumed, and they wanted to get proper policy advice from experts on whether that was the case. And what I can see is an audit trail of discussion between security officials debating how the policy framework would apply in this instance. And I should say it is unusual, although not unprecedented, for a political appointee to take up post as an ambassador. What I can see is there is a senior official from the Government Security Group that goes back to the Foreign Office security team and advises two things. One, that this is a decision for the Foreign Office, and two, that they would advise developed vetting is sought.
A stark warning from the United Nations as Human Rights Chief Volker Turk raises alarm over Mexico's deepening disappearance crisis. Speaking in Mexico City, Turk described the situation as one of the most painful human rights challenges in the world, leaving families in years of uncertainty and fear. With over 132,000 reported cases and thousands of clandestine graves, the UN says trust in the state is being dangerously eroded. Mexico's government has pushed back, rejecting the findings as biased, setting up a tense standoff as calls grow louder for truth, accountability, and justice. A shocking rail collision in northern Denmark has left a number of people injured. Two trains crashed head-on near Copenhagen. The impact left 5 passengers critically injured. Others rushed to hospital by air and ambulance. Emergency crews responded swiftly to the early morning crash. Reports indicating both trains were severely damaged. They were locked nose to nose on the tracks. Authorities are still investigating the cause, with early speculation pointing to a possible signal error. Well, South Africa's Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mameloko Kubai, has called for stronger global collaboration to tackle gender-based violence and femicide. As she says, the crisis continues to devastate families, scar communities, and undermine the rule of law, with women bearing the greatest burden. The minister made these comments while addressing the first day of the second high-level meeting of women judicial leaders of Africa, currently underway in Johannesburg, South Africa. Our correspondent Innocent Somoza has more.
The meeting, held alongside the Conference of Constitutional Jurisdictions of Africa, an independent body comprising 49 constitutional jurisdictions and 4 observer members, aimed to reinforce democratic governance. South Africa's Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mamoloko Kubai, says achieving gender equality requires deliberate, practical actions designed and implemented through a clear gender-responsive lens.
Any gathering that concerns itself with emancipation and advancement of women in any sphere of society deserves all our support and our praises. This is the struggle for women emancipation from the clutches of patriarchy that has been long and painful.
I asked delegates to highlight some of the biggest barriers preventing women from reaching top judicial positions across Africa.
Some of the challenges are, I would say, traditional. There has just always been a belief in the past that these top positions, especially judicial positions, are the preserve of men. But I must say that particularly in Nigeria, we have made a lot of strides, and now women are occupying the highest positions in every strata of the judiciary. I am the second female Chief Justice of Nigeria. The President of the Court of Appeal is female. We have almost over half of our chief judges and heads of court who are female.
They are bringing that feminine touch in the justice system. That for over years, even in South Africa here, by 1993, we only had 2 women judges. They're bringing that feminine touch, but also experience and lived realities for women in South Africa and in other parts of the world, including the continent of Africa.
Speaker of South Africa's National Assembly, Toko Didiza, says technology has the potential to make courts more accessible and inclusive.
It is important to ensure that there's a way in which our legislative framework to assist the judges also does deal with the management of the use of technology, because it can be good and bad. So it is important that our cybersecurity legislation is also strengthened. And therefore, when those legislations are there, it becomes easier.
Well, as deliberation continue here, women judicial leaders are calling for stronger representation, greater accountability, and a more inclusive justice systems across the continent. The meeting, of course, is expected to shape practical reforms aimed at strengthening the rule of law and advancing greater equality in Africa's courts. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
Well, we did tell you we'll be coming back to the Philippines, so this is where we're at. Dozens of children gathered at Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church in Quezon City, folding 1,000 origami cranes, heeding Pope Leo's urgent call for world peace and an end to war. Clergy for Good Governance Governor Father Robert Reyes emphasized the activity coincided with the Pope's continued appeals for an immediate halt to armed conflict, including ongoing tensions involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran. Father Reyes also called on U.S. President Donald Trump to listen to his fellow president amid his heated exchanges with the pontiff a couple of weeks ago. This origami practice is inspired by Sadako Sasaki, a young victim of the Hiroshima atomic bombing who folded origami cranes while battling leukemia.
President Trump, listen to your fellow president, Pope Leo. He is the word. He has the words of truth, the words of reason, the word that does not come from him, but that comes from the Spirit of God himself. The God that we all believe in, the God that you believe in, is the same God who wants peace. Especially this time, if you're listening very carefully to Pope Leo, anyone who espouses war now is not listening to God. I mean, everybody, regardless of who you are, what country you belong to, you should speak out and say, This war is against all of us. It is not against Iran. This war is against everybody in this planet because war will destroy everybody. The will of God, that peace, that dialogue, that reason will return to the discussion tables that should bring Trump, Iran, leaders of Iran, Netanyahu, and all those who are supporting either side to agree and to humbly agree that war is insane, war is greedy, war is immoral.
We should all heed Pope Leo's call for peace. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.